Okay. Wow. What a room of people. Welcome. My name is Maggie. I'm a board member here at Land to Hand. And we are so excited to have this Free the Seeds back in person where everyone can be here together joining us. This is our 8th annual Free the Seeds. And as I mentioned earlier, this one is a hybrid. So if you see me messing on the computer or anything, don't worry about that. It's for the people on Zoom. Free the Seeds is a community-based project from Land to Hand, and it's rooted in building sustainable and resilient future through real seeds, real food, and real life skills. And Land to Hand's mission overall is to build a strong community food system that fosters socially just ways of accessing food. And Free the Seeds is one great way to have that accessible to everyone here today. It is a zero waste event. So that means everything that comes from the Azul Coffee Bar or the food truck, the Dancing Burrow, is fully compostable, from napkins to containers to silverware. So you'll see around the event hall here, a bunch of the dirt rich compost bins. Please use those. And then anything that's not compostable, put in the normal trash cans, anything that you brought on your own. And Dirt Rich will compost everything that we purchase here today. We work really hard to keep this event free for everybody, but it does take a lot of time and money to keep the event free and to have it go on here today, which means it takes a lot of volunteer energy and power. So in any way, if you guys are able to donate time to save seeds from your own garden from next year, to come and package seeds next year, volunteer in any way you can, or if you are able to donate any sort of funds, we super appreciate it. If you go upstairs to the meet and greet booth, they have a donation bucket, or if you go online, we have a donate button. And actually 50% of the seeds here today are from community saved seeds. So it really does go a long way if you guys save your seeds from your own yards. And the very last thing is a big thanks to our big sponsors for this event this year. At our growler level, we have the Ivy Element based in Whitefish. And then at the pollinator level, we have Box of Rain Organic Garden Center, Earth Star Farms, Kalispell Farmers Market, and the FBCC Agricultural Program. So that's it for me. So without further ado, Mark.
All right, thanks, Maggie. All right, Staple Food Gardens. The other day I was driving up from Hot Springs, driving up the lake, and I was listening to the local radio station, the one that uses as much energy as a single light bulb. You guys know what I'm talking about, the little guys. And the song comes on the radio, this old song about homegrown tomatoes. Homegrown tomatoes, homegrown tomatoes. Ain't nothing, or what would life be without homegrown tomatoes? And, you know, naturally I turn it up a little. And, but anyways, there's a line in the song that there's only 2 things in life that money can't buy. Anyone know?
That's true love and homegrown.
Yes. Okay. True love and homegrown tomatoes. And that really resonated with me because there was no amount of money that was going to buy my wife's love. Okay. I had to grow homegrown tomatoes to really secure that love. And that experience, okay, that we get with homegrown tomatoes, right? When we start a seed and we see it sprout, oh, it sprouted, you know, and then we care for it inside probably. And then, you know, maybe we pot it up, it starts to warm up. We move that tomato outside. We see it through, you know, July comes, the heat comes, it starts to grow. We see some fruit developing and, you know, we're waiting, we're patient. We see our first, you know, hint of red and it starts to ripen. And then, you know, finally homegrown tomato season, we eat it and it's delicious. Okay. That whole experience, okay, it's inspired musical masterpieces like that song. Okay. But it's not just the flavor that we get out of that tomato. It's that whole experience of growing it too, right? It all comes together for that experience. And, you know, that experience is available in more than just that homegrown tomato, right? And so I'm here today to talk about staple foods in the garden. And my experience has been, you know, as I started growing corn and squash and potatoes, okay, beans, those are kind of the main crops we're going to talk about today. It was kind of the same thing, like, wow, this corn makes the best cornbread you've ever had. The squash, the flavor is amazing. Okay. And so it's a special thing, and it's not, there's a lot of advantages when we're talking about, growing our own staple foods in our home gardens. Okay. The agricultural soils of today, like, they're overcropped, right? They're overworked, they're exhausted, they're mineral deficient. Okay. And that comes through in the food that you buy from these big farms. And not only that, but at home we have access to different varieties that aren't bred just for commercial production. A lot of these heirlooms are bred for flavor. And so you combine that with growing them in a nourished, living soil of our home garden, and the flavor, right? So maybe when I was at first, I got into this with, maybe a little prepper mentality, kind of like, I got to have all my food. The grocery store shelves go empty or something like that. Now it's really for enjoyment, to enjoy the meals that we put on our table. If the grocery store shelves go empty, like, I got a lot of neighbors to feed, there's bigger problems. So really it's, the idea is to, start growing our own food and spread it to our neighbors, to our community, a growing movement, which is, coming to an event like today and seeing how many people come out for this, it's inspiring, to say the least.
It's just a tapping.
Oh, so the arrow.
Yeah. Or it should. Excuse us.
Bear with us for 1 second here. Okay.
We'll just do it that way, I guess.
Okay, sounds good. So my wife and I and our newborn son, we are down in Hot Springs. Okay, just a little background. Tadapani Farm and Homestead is what we call our little place. So we're Homestead Food Supply. We're really growing our own food and then kind of selling the extra. But then we do hone in on some select market crops that we bring to our local farmers market. And so we're approaching a half acre of gardens, okay, of actual cultivated land. We're approaching a half acre, and we have little additional help. I think this is an important point. People think like a big garden, like, oh, you're just out there all day, it's your whole life. I mean, I guess in a sense, it is my whole life. I'm kind of a farmer, but I do work off the farm a lot. And we do have family and friends that help us, we'll get them out weeding with us and everything. But yeah, we really have little additional help. And the way we do this is natural mulches. Okay, 100%. Natural mulches reduces the amount of time that you're going to be spending out in the garden weeding. You spend time applying the mulch, collecting the mulch. Okay, there is, other factors, but we're going to talk more about that. And yeah, that's a big reason we don't have to hire additional help. Then we also have goats and chickens and orchards. You don't need to own the land. Okay, this is an important point that I wanted to make. When we're talking about a staple food garden, these are crops that you put in the spring, like you put in June, okay? And then you're not out there harvesting every day, some lettuce for your salad. You're not harvesting, the zucchinis. Well, maybe zucchinis are a part of it, but maybe we'll keep those at home. But a lot of these crops like winter squash and corn, dry beans, we're going to talk about, you put them in and then they're full-term crops. They go the whole season. So really, you put some work in, you get them planted, you get the irrigation set up, and then you visit it once a week. So if it's 10 miles down the road, if it's across town, maybe you go in with your neighbor. It doesn't have to be right in your backyard because we don't need to be there every day harvesting. I find once a week is a good kind of rule of thumb to go check on it to, if your irrigation's on a timer, make sure that's working. Or if you water manually, with natural mulches, you can water once a week for a long period. Okay, so let's keep moving along here and feel free to interject with any questions as we get going. Where do we live? Okay, here's a picture of my dog panting in the heat of the summer and then sniffing a snowbank, okay, in the middle of winter. And looking out these back windows right here, like, wow, what an amazing view. Okay, this is a special place we live. But when we're talking about growing, okay, short growing season. Okay, and then there's cold hardy crops that'll hang out, right? In October, maybe even Thanksgiving if it's a good fall. But the bulk of our food, we have a short time to grow that. Okay. And so what does that mean? Okay, short growing season, long winter, storage climate. We live in the north. We live in a storage climate. Okay. We grow our food during that short growing season, and then we store it for the winter while we kick back and soak in the hot springs and all the things, go skiing and whatnot. Okay, so storing our food for the winter. Right now, like we still have a good amount of food at home in our root cellar, in our dry storage. And when it really gets challenging? April, May, into June. Okay. That's what we call the hunger gap. I wouldn't even call March the hunger gap quite yet. Okay. And what's that mean? All our stored food, we've been eating it all winter, right? Enjoying these squash and potatoes, everything. But how good was our harvest? And how good is our storage? Okay. Our storage conditions, how well are we taking care of that food in storage? Okay. Because that's the challenge, is growing enough food in June, July, August, September to feed you in April, May. Okay. You might be going out and harvesting some sunchokes, some parsnips, the greens are coming in springtime, and we welcome that. We love that. It's great. Okay. But we still need our calories. We need our staple foods in that hunger gap. Okay. Which is coming up. And so that's an important point when we're talking about food storage is, we got to see the whole picture. So there's two primary types of storage. Okay. And I think it's really very simple. We have our dry storage and we have our cold storage. Dry storage, simply room temperature. Okay. It might be optimum to be cooler, 60 degrees, 50 degrees. But in my experience, okay, with squash, and then you can see like we have a lot of dried food, that's fine at room temperature in jars. Onions and garlic, as long as it's dry, they'll hold up fine for the most part at room temperature. Now, what we do is we have a spare bedroom and we leave the door cracked. So just a little bit of wood stove heat gets in there. And so it stays about 60 degrees. And that's a little better. But if all you have is a living room and you can put squash on your shelves in your living room, that'll work great. In my experience, it works fine. Okay, so that's our dry storage. Simple. We all have it. We all have it. Cold storage, now we're getting a little trickier. Okay, so what are we talking about with cold storage? Replicating a refrigerator, pretty much. Okay, above freezing, but 34 to 40 degrees cold. Now, ideally, it's higher humidity too, like a giant crisper drawer of the refrigerator is what we're trying to ideally replicate with cold storage. Okay, so I'll talk more about that. Let me keep going here. Now here's for us, and it might not be the same for you. Like we all have different body types, different constitutions, different dietary needs, different things we like to eat, right? And so I don't want to tell you what you should grow and eat, but I think a lot of this, a lot of these foods are good for most of us, right? So our most important storage crops for dry storage, field corn, okay, which is dried corn for grinding, making cornbread, polenta, tortillas, things like that. Squash, okay, squash, room temperature, dry storage, winter squash, okay, but then also summer squash. Summer squash needs to be dehydrated, okay, for storage. Dry beans, okay, and we love green beans too. We can some green beans, maybe freeze some, but mainly what we're talking about is dry beans. And then garlic and onion. I can't imagine a winter of soups without garlic and onion. So then in the cold storage, okay, down in the root cellar, in the refrigerator, potatoes, okay. Apples is one people don't often think about, but apples are really the king fruit of the north. And that's because they store through the hunger gap. Not all of them, not every variety. Okay, but there are lots of varieties. A popular one being Honeycrisp. Okay, it will store and it will store well, and still be excellent eating, come that hunger gap if it's in good storage conditions. So apples are, a great one because, without doing any canning or relying on a freezer, you can just put them into cold storage and they'll be there waiting for you. And then carrots, it's a great one. You can snack on them raw, put them in soups. And then beets also is a nice mix up in the winter in our cold storage. Okay, so if you don't have a root cellar, does anyone here have a root cellar?
We just put one in last year.
Excellent investment. Yeah,
Yeah, but I still have to tweak some things because the squash didn't make it. And usually when I had an extra room, the squash made it. So now I know why.
yeah, I would keep the squash out of the cold, especially a root cellar, because the last thing you want is high humidity for squash,
I
right?
thought if I could put the squash up high and the roots down low, the temperature difference, but
Didn't quite do
it
it. Huh?
wasn't.
Yeah. So most of us don't have a root cellar. Okay. So if you don't have a root cellar, and I think it's one of the best investments you can make. But like, I totally understand, like most of us don't have a root cellar. Okay. And we're not going to go out there and stack concrete block for a month like I was. Okay. So an extra refrigerator. Okay. That's a good starting point, right? And you have an extra refrigerator, and come harvest time, you stuff it full of carrots, potatoes, okay, apples. But the problem with a refrigerator, right? We run out of space pretty quick when we're talking about storing food for the whole winter. Okay. And it's one of the lesser resilient forms of storage, right? Who here knows how to fix a refrigerator? And power goes out, so. But it's a good starting point, and it's better than nothing. Okay. So then a garage or an enclosed porch or an insulated shed. Okay. Now these can be pretty good options. So now let's say we have a shop or a detached garage. Okay. What's going to be the problem there? Freezing, right? So we have to prevent it from freezing. Okay, when it goes down to -30 around, Christmas time, we have to run some heat in there and keep it up above that freezing point. Some of our cold storage crops, they can freeze a little, and you might only lose 5-10%, but that freeze thaw, that will, kill the storage life of your crops. So, like I have a friend in Hot Springs, and he has like this enclosed porch off his house, and he just runs a little heater out there, keeps it from freezing, and he stores lots of food out there all winter. Okay, or yep.
Well, I have lucky to have a heater in my garage, but I'm having trouble with potatoes. Is there a temperature that you should keep your garage at?
So out of the cold storage crops, okay, potatoes are the ones that are a little different because they don't like high humidity. Where everything else you want to maintain humidity, potatoes like it a little drier and a little warmer. Okay, so in our root cellar, we put our potatoes up high where it's a little warmer. Okay, and then the carrots, apples, those can all go down low.
We store our carrots and potatoes together, but the potatoes give off the moisture that the carrots need. The carrots soak up the moisture the potatoes give off.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great tip. So for people at home, storing the carrots and potatoes together. So in a bin of like with sawdust or anything like that, or just loose? Cool.
Hard way the first year, the second year we put them all together and they did the perfect.
That's great. Yeah, I've never heard that one. So that's a really great tip there. Potatoes and carrots together, and the extra moisture from the potatoes, the carrots like that. Yeah, that's a great one.
The other thing about potatoes, the night guard, we always grew like 3 pints. The reds would go first, we eat those first, the Yukons would go next, and the rust is always held out until later in the season, so you can plant your crops to have the best of the potatoes and have longevity.
Yeah, definitely. It's important to know the storage life of the varieties you're growing so you can eat the ones first that store less. And we'll talk a little bit about varieties too as we get into it here. So now greenhouses, okay, definitely we live in the north, right? Greenhouses are a blessing. Like we love having greenhouses. Okay, but what you have to understand is it's very challenging to grow food through the winter in a greenhouse. Okay. And so really, if you have a heated greenhouse, really what you're doing is you're getting a crop up and then you're letting it sit there and storing it like living storage, so like a bed of greens here. Okay. I have to get that up and growing in October, right? So it's up and full by November, because in November we dip below the 10-hour day and plants don't grow without a 10-hour day, right? So you can get into supplemental light into a greenhouse. If you just need to have those greens growing all winter, you can put up grow lights and go that route. But otherwise, when we're talking about greenhouses in the winter, we're talking about, growing the carrots starting in summer into the fall, and then they stay there for the winter and we harvest them through the winter. Or a bed of greens, we get it up and then we harvest it through the winter. But now you have to imagine you need a pretty big area. If you eat greens every day, that bed's going to go pretty quick because it's not regenerating. Okay. So while greenhouses are, phenomenal in our shoulder seasons, okay, for growth, they have their limitations for winter. Okay. That's the point. And, so here you see a picture here. This is a greenhouse we recently built off the front of our house. Okay. And I'm a huge fan of that. Any structure that's going to hold heat and help create a little more of a microclimate is a really nice advantage for a greenhouse. And then you can see this is one we had built years ago out of cattle panels. Okay, really simple structures, and they can be a huge boost in the shoulder seasons, to get those greens coming in the early spring to help out with that hunger gap that we're talking about. Okay, let's build a garden. This is at our neighbor's property down in Hot Springs. You can see it's just field, just grass. She mowed it once a year and that's about it. So, okay, the first thing we did, we staked out 25 feet. Okay, it's a 25-foot, each side of a square. Okay, and you want to be fair. We're fairly precise because we bought a 100-foot roll of fencing and we want that to fit, right? So, in permaculture, like, we often get into kind of like wild tending of landscapes, and I love that, but like, I need my roll of fencing to fit appropriately. And we'll kind of talk more about that. But so this garden was started with sheet mulching. Okay. And all it is, so we came out to that open, 25-foot by 25-foot staked area, and we put cardboard down. A lot of people go wrong where they don't overlap the cardboard over enough, and the quackgrass kind of sneaks its way through, right? So you really got to overlap that cardboard. Okay. And then we just brought a trailer load full of sawdust and covered the cardboard with sawdust. Okay. And we use sawdust because that's what we had access to. There's mulches that I prefer more, but sawdust works. And so it's we'll talk more about the mulches, but sawdust is what we had. So we, cardboard, and this is in the fall, cardboard, sawdust, came back in the spring, and every 5 feet we parted the sawdust. If the cardboard was, not deteriorated too much, we cut it and just kind of pulled it back and made a little planting pocket. Okay, then we took some really nice aged manure and we filled that little planting pocket with aged manure. And we did this every 5 feet. Okay. And then we stuck our squash seeds in, and you can see, first year garden, cardboard, sawdust, and then a little bit of manure and a sprinkler right in the middle, set to go for 4 hours once a week. Okay. Once the plants were established. When you're establishing plants, you gotta, keep them watered every day. But then once they're up and going, okay, you water heavy once a week, or, maybe a little more, a little less at all. There's lots of variables there. Is that a question? Yep.
For like virgin ground or stonier areas, would you recommend doing that initial tilling for 1 year just to get the stones out of the ground? Because I feel like the stones still can do lots of rocks.
So, what I would be tempted to do with a lot of stones in the ground that I'm trying to, put a garden in, I might just go the same initial strategy as this. Okay. And then the sod's going to die. The soil's going to start to get some workability to it as that organic matter works down in there. And then as I continue to garden that patch over the years, I'm just going to keep taking stones out, keep taking them out, steady. Because, I don't like to dig weeds. I don't like to dig rocks. I'm just going to pile mulch on there and let nature do its thing and loosen that soil up. And then, when a couple years later, I go to plant something there. Oh, is that a rock? I'm going to take that out. Plant roots will go around rocks, right? They'll work with it. It's not ideal. We'd rather have, black soil there than a big rock. But yeah, that would be my strategy. And it depends how rocky and, but that's a thought on that.
Question.
Yep.
What's using the cardboard that way? Did you find, because I've seen people do that to attract worms and healthy bugs and stuff like that. Did you find that it increased your critter population by doing the cardboard?
So absolutely. Okay. Any cardboard or mulch, cardboard is a natural mulch, essentially, it's not ideal, but any mulch on top of a soil is gonna, you might go to some soil and you can't find a single earthworm, pile it with mulch, come back a few months later and the worms, they find it. That's food, that's their food, right? They want that organic matter. They come up, we just put it on top, they come up and they eat it and bring it back down and create holes in the soil and do their magic. Yep.
So you say, obviously it is more beneficial to start as fall and then start that process. So we get working down and you're starting to start something in spring. With that.
I'd say, so doing this, I'd say it's advantageous to start in the fall, but I would do the same thing springtime too. Okay. Now, squash is my favorite crop to do for a freshly sheet mulch garden. Okay. We had some tomatoes around the perimeter where the same thing. We just kind of made a planting pocket and stuck in some tomatoes, some peppers. But to cover that whole garden area, it takes a lot of labor to plant in a freshly sheet mulch garden. Okay. And that's why squash is so nice, because you can just plant it every 5 feet and let them run. Okay. Winter squash, and we did have zucchinis too, summer squash. They're a nice one. And we'll talk more about them. Question?
Oh, I was just saying with the squash and really anything, just harvest what you need. Let everything decompose naturally. And then fall time, cover all that nitrogen rich green with leaves from whitefish or whatever. And then let it sit over winter, and that will give you more soil for the worms and planting the next season. So just don't clean up your garden, just let it rot and build more soil.
Okay, I love that point, and it's a perfect transition to this next slide. Okay, not cleaning up your garden in the fall, just letting everything rot down, because this approach, like, we're bringing in as much organic matter to feed the soil as we can. Okay, and so your plants that grew during the season, just let them die down. They're going to feed the earthworms, just like you're saying. So now types of mulches. Okay, wood chips is a great one. Avoid cedar would be my only thing there. Cedar is very slow to break down, and yeah, I would just try to avoid cedar. Hay or straw is probably my favorite mulch to work with. It's a lot of seeds in it. Okay, it depends, but here's the thing: if we have a garden that we keep naturally mulched, we're not creating conditions for those seeds to germinate. The only spot where we're creating those conditions is right where we're planting. Okay, so I'm not worried about seeds as much when I bring mulches in. What I do look for is quackgrass roots. Okay, and those, if people don't know, they're like these white, light colored roots that just go really long. Okay, and you want to kind of learn what those look like and keep an eye out for those. But I'll still take a load of mulch if it's full of quackgrass, and I'll just try to pick it out as I go. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. You know, it's just, if it gets out of control, maybe I'll sheet mulch it again, you know, but hopefully once I put the work into sheet mulching that garden, I'm gonna keep it in check, you know. But yeah, with quack grass, you know, it's really slow and steady. I don't stress about it. I just keep, when I see it, I take it out, you know, and just as long as it's, you know, you keep it away from what you're trying to grow it and don't let it take over. Now, hay and straw, the biggest thing is no herbicide. Okay. I think there's a lot of gardens that are suffering from herbicide residues and people just don't even know it. They think they don't have a green thumb. Okay. But unfortunately, herbicide use is so ubiquitous, okay, in farming right now. It's, you know, you really want to make sure when you get hay or straw that it hasn't been sprayed with a broadleaf herbicide, especially.
How do you make sure?
You know, that's, you know, your farmer.
Okay.
And I wish there was an easier way. You know, you don't see too much organic hay and straw listed, you know, that kind of requires organic land. So it doesn't necessarily have to be organic, but you gotta, you know, usually if you ask, they'll tell you, and you can kind of, you know, people don't lie for the most part. Like farmers are hardworking, honest people, you know, and we don't need to be a-holes about it, you know, we just want, you just say, hey, it's for my garden, you know, and I just want to make sure there's no herbicide. That's all. You know, horse hay is notorious for it. And also horse bedding, be really careful because horses, like, you know, they don't want the weeds, so they're hitting it with herbicide. And not all the time, just sometimes. Now, yep.
First question, you have, you're saying let the foliage of your plants rot. This is assuming you have harvested all of the
Fruits and
fruits
yep,
from it.
exactly.
If you don't do that and you've left way too many tomato plants and peppers, would you start by doing another sheet mulch type of thing to get rid of that? I have one
No.
gardener in my garden that doesn't take
No, you know, so tomatoes and peppers are annuals, right? So they're not going to regrow the following year. So it's just kind of dead, dying matter. And what I do, I don't clean up my garden at all in the fall. Okay, I don't clean it up till the springtime. When I go to plant that bed and last year's tomatoes are in the way, now I'm going to get them out of there. Now I'm going to deal with them. And I might just kind of cut them and put them in the pathway. Or I might, you know, fill a wheelbarrow and bring it over to the chickens and mulch their pen or something like that. And also, you know, leaving plants in the fall, it provides nice habitat for insects over the winter too. That's another advantage. You know, I clean up my garden as little as possible, just when it's in the way, because I'm planting those carrots. Okay, now I'm going to pull out those tomatoes from last year. Okay. And if I can, I'm going to leave the roots, but because I'm planting carrots, those roots are going to be in the way. So I'm pulling the tomato out finally from last year. Yeah.
What about seeds? They won't regrow?
Well, hopefully we're harvested all the fruits, so there's not too many seeds, you know, and I do try to, even though natural mulches won't provide germination conditions for seeds. Okay, I try to get weeds before they go to seed. I try to get all the tomatoes, like, try to keep the seed population under control to what we want, in a sense.
So
Yep.
and this,
When you're
this
talking
seed
sheet
of
mulch.
Oh, excuse me, one sec.
They're much
Okay.
easier to pull than like persistent weeds that, like, I'd way rather, I
Yeah.
call it lazy gardening. Like, I'd
Yeah.
way rather have something regrow that I might actually want the plant. And then I just thin, and that's way easier than like recreating a brand new space, like. But yeah, ideally you're harvesting most of it, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
just how thick when you're talking sheet mulch, how much matter on top of your, okay.
8 inches. Okay. It's usually when people mulch their gardens, they go wrong by a thin layer of mulch. And then the weeds are like, oh, these conditions are great, you know, but if you go, you know, and as your soil builds and builds, okay, then you don't need to go that thick. You just need to go thick enough to suppress weeds. Or maybe at that point, you stop mulching because you have this beautiful soil that when you go to weed, you just pull the weeds, pull the dandelions right out. Right. That's like you see gardeners on YouTube and things like, look how easy gardening is, you know, and it's like, well, you have beautiful black soil that's been built up for years and years. Most of us don't have that. That's the goal. But Was there another question? Yeah.
You talked earlier about like overlapping cardboard.
Yes.
Is that like 2 layers or is it?
It's one layer. It's just don't butt it up, overlap the seams. So it could, you know, if you just butt it up, weeds will find their way through. So you overlap the seams. That's all. Yeah. So we also have a lot of sawmills around here. Great place to get natural mulches. Okay, they don't use herbicides in the sawmills. Wood shavings I found to be an excellent mulch. And then leaves, great mulch. Okay, sometimes if you put them on your garden in the fall, they might blow away. I find it much better to shred the leaves first if you have some kind of shredder, or put the leaves down and then put some hay down, or you know, put the leaves down, then some wood shavings down, and that'll keep the leaves.
You put the leaves down right before it snows.
Right.
So that, yeah, there you go.
And you have it ready to go, and you just look at the forecast, you're like, oh, it's gonna dump. I'm gonna put the leaves on
Yep.
this week, and then it'll wet them all down when it melts, it's.
So you time putting your leaves down before precipitation, before snow comes, so it weighs it down and creates like a mat and lessens that blowing in the wind.
Is there any time to worry about mold going from the leaves being down for extended period
Well,
of time where it's
leaves-
so wet and the leaves?
Molds on the leaves.
Well, just the mold, is that gonna go into the roots of the
Well,
new plants?
the leaves are on top of all of that, garden stuff that you let, like the vines and stuff. So you have like, it's a big compost thing. So you have your nitrogen, which is your green squash vines, put the carbon on top, which is your leaves. And then, right after that, it's gonna snow, which is providing that water. So by the time spring comes, you just made like your own compost pile, but it's spread out over your garden, and during the winter time in the spring, the worms are eating all of that. So if there's mold, it's pretty minimal because it's.
The only type of mold I would worry about is if I dumped a bucket of food scraps on top of the garden and that was rotting and I'm trying to grow my lettuce right next to that. Okay, natural mulches, they break down fine and you don't have to worry about that.
A lot of willow leaves and stuff. Where, when I'm gonna plant. Would I just kind of wipe that away from it for a while?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Oh.
Okay, we'll talk about that. Okay, sawdust, and I mentioned not the best, go ahead.
Is there, we're just gonna start this year.
Uh-huh.
We're gonna do great beds and stuff. Is there something different that we do this year versus what we do at the end of the season?
Not really, not really. I would say not really is a simple answer to that question. It's kind of all the same in a
I did
sense,
this
yeah.
exact same process in the spring of last year. And then just covered the top with dirt and it worked just fine.
There you go. Okay. Sawdust, very high carbon and nitrogen ratio, so it's much slower to break down. It's not the best natural mulch, but you saw the garden we used it for, it still works. And over the years, it'll really feed the soil. And animal bedding is a great, natural mulch because it has all that manure, all that nitrogen too. I just wouldn't grow your potatoes in animal bedding. They don't want as much nitrogen. Okay, but corn, squash, they'll love it. Okay, as tomatoes, a lot of your garden crops. And the most important point with the natural mulches is we never till them in. Okay, we're always top down, building the soil top down. Okay, you come look at our garden in Hot Springs and you won't see a speck of bare soil other than right around the plant. Every part of the garden is covered in natural mulch, the pathways, the beds. And because we're building the soil, right? And we're never tilling that in every year. If when it needs it, we just add more on top, keep the weeds from coming up.
Large needles and pine tree needles, okay, or two?
Potatoes will love it, but you might have to do some experimenting with that, and just pine needles on its own. Certain crops like potatoes might be okay with it, but other ones might not like it so much. Over time, it's going to break down and feed the soil and balance out pH wise. But initially it might not be the best. So you might want to be a little careful.
So I'm on a city lot and working with raised beds, and I'm kind of restarting, but trying to mulch more. But how do you do that with like direct seeding and like your leafy greens?
We'll talk about that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so never till your mulch in. Okay, another strategy for starting gardens, okay, is till and then mulch. Okay, that'll break the soil up, give you something kind of workable underneath that layer of mulch. Okay, so you call up, your neighbor with the tiller or the guy in the local, with the local advertisement, get him to come over, till the soil, make it more workable, and then cover it with mulch, and then you're off to the races this spring. Okay, it's a good strategy. And then another strategy is tarp then mulch. You see this a lot on small farms. Okay, it's called, you kind of see behind this greenhouse here, it's called a silage tarp, and it's just, thick black tarp, anything that's going to smother, right? We're just trying to kill the sod, kill the grass off and weeds. In 1 year of a tarp being down, we'll give you a clean slate of ground to work on. The grass will be dead, weed seeds will be cooked. If it's a black tarp, the weed seeds will cook in that summer heat, and then you pull it off the next year and you got clean ground ready to go. Where maybe you want to till it to get it more workable. I tend to just mulch and go. I've been tilling less and less and less over the years.
And you do crab grass.
Quackgrass you can actually kill through repeated tilling. Like a lot of farmers, if they have quackgrass, they'll till. On a small scale, the tarp for a full year will kill the quackgrass. That's, yeah. Okay, so this is the planting question people have had. So planting into a mulch garden, you can see here, spread this. I think I planted carrots in this. Okay, spread the mulch. Okay, so I have a whole mulch area. Spread the mulch, little trenches, and I fill that trench with a nice compost, and then I put my carrot seeds into that. Okay, or my greens or whatever it is. Or if it's like a tomato plant, I just clear a circle and put compost into that circle. And then, so then what you have is you kind of have this pot almost in the ground almost of compost, of beautiful, rich compost surrounded by mulch, and the roots, they get a great start in that compost and they go down into the soil under the mulch, and they love those conditions under there. Okay. So mulch, as we talked about, can reduce weeding, in my experience, by 70%. Okay, but it makes weeds easier to pull up. You'll find year 2 of mulching a garden, weeding is a whole different thing. You're not digging them out, right? They're starting to just kind of pull right out. Now, an important thing with a mulch garden, you need to irrigate longer. Okay, so not frequent short intervals, but less frequent long intervals, because we got to soak down that mulch and then soak through. And so I find, once things are established, once a week for like 4 to 6 hours. That might sound crazy, might sound like a lot, but a sprinkler going for 5 hours once a week on a mulch garden, it works. Okay, and then my rule, once I start a garden, my rule is no grass allowed. Okay, I'm not as concerned with other weeds so much, but no grass allowed. Grass is a different thing, right? It forms turf, sod, it takes over, it'll just choke out what we're trying to grow. Okay, so I have this rule. I'm walking through my garden. Now, if I see grass, I stop what I'm doing and I pull it out for the most part, Other weeds, I'm not as concerned about. Oh, some wild lettuce, some dandelions. I'm just going to get those before they go to seed, and I'm just going to kind of chop them and drop them, right? Just kill them. Okay, I just don't want them to go to seed and put out thousands of seeds. But if they're growing, they're building soil. Plants build soil. Weeds build soil. Okay, mulch builds soil. But what builds soil more is weeds or plants growing through mulch. Okay, then the worms really come in. Okay, the soil life really kicks up when the plants are there too. Okay. All right, we're into the crop specifics. How are we doing on time? Pretty good. Yep.
So I'm so encouraged this new too. The place I have was a garden, but now this high, well, it wasn't all this high grass. So, what would you recommend? You need some clear mulch, or just take all of that out, even if it's
The grass?
yeah.
I would leave all the grass.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would leave it all, and because if, if we're in it for if we're in it for maybe not even the long haul, but for years, like we're trying to build soil over the years, we want as much organic matter as we can into that area. Okay, so now when we're talking about staple food gardens, okay, if you think about like what we might think of a traditional garden, you have your garden, okay, and then you kind of do maybe rows like beds down the garden, okay, or you do like kind of beds like this, or whatever it is. But when we're talking about staple food gardens, okay, we're talking about patches, big patches of one crop. Okay, so instead of like a mixed area, we're talking about a whole, sprinkler coming out to the middle, and then this whole thing filled with potatoes. Okay, a potato patch. I work in 25-foot by 25-foot patches, and that grows enough potatoes for my wife and I for the whole winter, and then to have enough to plant the following spring as well. I'll show some specifics with that. Okay, and that's, getting back to the, you don't need to own the land. Okay, it can be, maybe you go in with a friend or a neighbor and you find somewhere where there's some ground and maybe it's already fenced. That's that's big, and there's water. Okay, and then you do a patch of potatoes, a patch of squash, a patch of corn, right? And we're doing bigger patches. And the main reason we're doing this, okay, is because we want to control the irrigation differently on each crop. Okay. I do by default, so like any volunteer plant that comes up, whether it's a weed or something, a garden plant.
Basil around your feet.
I don't, well, I do, yes. But talking about the potato patch, I'll let volunteers go, especially if I like them, and like as long as they're not interfering too much with my potatoes, because mainly I want to look out and I want to know I have enough potatoes for our family for the winter. Right. So, and I'm happy to see weeds and edibles and things growing, but I just want to make sure I got enough potatoes for winter at the same time. So potatoes are an excellent pioneer crop. You can see this, okay, on the far side in the fall, I just covered an old garden area with wood chips. Okay, I came back in the spring and it's called a furrow plow, just a long handled furrow plow. I just drug it and made those trenches. Okay, and then I threw my seed potato in there, and then I just covered it with hay. Okay, and put a sprinkler on it and kind of walked away. Maybe weeded it once every 2 weeks. Okay, so I love potatoes for pioneering new ground because they do well with lots of mulch on top of them. And if we bring in lots of mulch, we're building soil, right? And so potatoes growing out of hay, growing out of straw, it works. And we'll talk a little more about that. So you can see this patch here. I came in the early spring, the far one, and I covered it with hay. It was grass. Okay, it was lawn, and I covered it thick with hay. And then came back the end of May. That grass was pretty much killed off because I went thick enough with the hay. Okay, then I spread rows, put my seed potato in, covered it with more hay, and got a nice crop of potatoes. Okay, it was that easy. And then this is a bigger patch of potatoes here. Okay, it was first year ground. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But some of the varieties that we've really liked, Yukon Gem is an excellent, it's a high yield, really nice yield. It's an improvement on the Yukon Gold. It has really nice flavor and a really nice yield. We really like the Yukon Gem. German Butterball is a great one. Russet Burbank, right? It stores really well. Huckleberry Gold is delicious. Anyone had Huckleberry Gold?
I did, but I bought a second. Not many of them German. They didn't put out proper ice, but beautiful potatoes, ones that harvested. So I didn't proceed this year.
Okay. So, that's interesting to hear. We found Huckleberry Golds to be a little more finicky. It seems like they like irrigation through like the whole season, and they like pretty good soil conditions. Maybe they are delicious, but I don't know if we're going to keep growing them just because they're a little more finicky. We're lucky in Montana that there's lots of seed potato farms around here, producing organic seed potatoes. I get them from a woman, Nancy Beach, down in Paradise. I'm not sure, Mountain Spring Farms, maybe. Yeah, so that's something we can get locally is organic seed potato. Yep.
What about growing, have you tried yams or sweet potatoes?
I have not. Typically, they require more heat in a longer season. Regular potatoes do so well that we haven't experimented with yams and sweet potatoes.
One more question. So if you have leftover potatoes in the basement and you plant them,
Uh-huh.
does it matter? Is a small potato gonna yield a small potato?
No, that doesn't matter. Yeah.
Just, I know it's kind of a silly question.
You want about a golf ball size. So if you have a big potato, you want to plant like a golf ball size. So you cut it up, make sure it has 1 or 2 eyes. But yeah, it doesn't matter. Not like garlic
Okay.
in a sense. Yep.
What do you do if your seed potatoes have started sprouting, they have these long sprouts on them? Do you break off the sprouts or try to give the whole potato and the sprout in the soil?
So if our seed potato, if we're saving our potatoes from last year and they start to sprout these long sprouts, you just want to plant it very carefully because those sprouts they're really an advantage. Like that potato is often going, in a sense. So you just want to be careful not to break it because then the seed's going to lose energy and not be as, fruitful. And ideally, like we don't get these super long sprouts, maybe just to make planting easier. Okay. But, a little sprout is ideal. We actually want a little bit of sprout on our seed potato when we go to plant it. We call it chitting our potatoes. So I bring my potatoes out of the root cellar in early April and let them sit in a warmer temperature for maybe a month and then let them start to chit and grow those sprouts before planting them. So that last patch you saw, the big one there, so it was the first year. This was just field, okay, never gardened before, covered with organic straw. Okay, we planted 60 pounds of potatoes and we harvested 400 pounds of potatoes. Okay. And it's funny to hear the wows because that's actually not a very good yield. Potatoes are like a super producer. They're amazing, okay, for producing calories for us. And so typically you'd want to see times 10, right? So 60, like in a good, if we had good, beautiful garden soil, it'd be 600 pounds potentially of
Question from online.
Yep.
Kelly was curious how you keep your deer and gophers away from potato plants.
So deer, we got to fence our deer out. It's, if you have a livestock guardian dog, okay, that's good at running. That's the only other solution that I found is a good dog that lives outside, doesn't come in at night. Otherwise, we need good fencing. Okay, maybe not even good fencing. I find 6.5 feet to be enough. Deer can jump 6.5 feet, but they won't unless they're kind of spooked or if they get a taste of your strawberries, they might come back for more. But deer fencing is important. And gophers, I would say live traps. And the way you do a live trap, a hard trap, is you leave a trail of like lettuce leading into the trap. Okay, don't just bait your trap and set it out. Leave a trail, leading into it, and that I found that helps with live traps.
If you're fencing for deer, one of the tricks you can use is if you've got 6-foot high fence wire, put it up so it's a foot off the ground.
I like that.
The deer won't go under that 1 foot, but that makes it a 7-foot fence in their mind. I've had good success doing that.
Okay, so that's a great point. He was talking about lifting our fence. If we only have a 6-foot roll of fence, instead of putting it at ground level, lifting it up to get more height, because deer, they don't go under to some extent. You can leave a foot or
A foot they won't try. If you put it up 2 feet, the small ones will go under it.
So 2 feet, yeah, I can picture that small.
Put up, it's each 7 foot.
So, important point with potatoes, if we're talking about storage, we're talking about storing our potatoes for the hunger gap. Okay. We sneak potatoes when we want to have them for dinner in the fall, but otherwise we leave them, okay, in the ground as long as we can, because we're waiting for our root cellar to cool down or our garage to cool down. Okay. And the potatoes will be much better off in the ground. Like the tops die back Okay, and you might not even be able to tell there were potatoes planted there come, late October, and that's fine. And then we'll get out and harvest them once it's cooled down, our root cellars cooled down, okay, for storage. So we're not necessarily in a race to get our potato crop in. We actually we're fine with it being later, okay, for storage. Well, like I said, we'll sneak potatoes, we'll still go out and harvest some, but not the whole crop to bring in for storage.
Honestly, we left ours for a whole year. We were away and it snowed. We didn't harvest that year. And they were the best potatoes that we had that spring.
It's amazing how many accounts I hear of people who just leave their potatoes in the ground and have great success with it. Okay. Exactly. So mulch on top of that, you're going to be better off. Okay. And what would kill a potato left in the ground? Okay. Is that freeze thaw, right? Freeze thaw. But if you mulch it and it's in the soil and it's maybe a decent winter, you could keep potatoes in the ground maybe all winter. It'd be tough, when that cold snap hits, if the ground freezes and you can't get into, the ground is frozen. But, my neighbor, he puts a sheet of plastic and then mulch, and his ground never freezes, and he harvests potatoes all winter right out of his garden. Okay, so that's a great strategy.
You get carrots.
You can do that with carrots as well. That's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. Do you do a sheet of plastic or just mulch? Yep, sheet of plastic.
But fairly just moist and not real wet.
Uh-huh.
And then just pile the stuff on it.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. So a sheet of plastic, natural mulch on top, harvesting carrots and potatoes all winter.
Sheet of plastic, clear or black?
It won't matter because you're going to have a natural mulch on top. So yeah, probably wouldn't matter.
What about compost?
About compost?
Yeah, you compost or?
I do compost, and then I use that compost when I go to make a planting pocket in the mulch. That's where I use my compost.
What's the best way to do that?
There's so many different strategies for composting. The easiest being throw it in a pile and let it age. And then there's also turning it.
Does the barrel work any better?
The barrel, I find it works for very small spaces, but as soon as you're getting up to any size garden, maybe you get some pallets. And I really like a 3-bay pallet system. Okay, and then you can fork one bay over to the next bay and get a few turns in and speed up that process a little. Okay, and one point on green potatoes. Okay, you can save those and replant them for seed. Don't eat them, right? Even a speck of green on your potato, you shouldn't eat that. It's a sign of glycoalkaloid poisoning. Okay, and so that's in the potato. Any spot of green and you have that glycoalkaloid poisoning. Okay, you don't mess with nightshades like that. Any spot of green, you don't feed it to animals either. Okay, the only thing you can really do for it that I found is save it for seed for the next year, and it's good for that. That it doesn't matter that it's got a little green for that. But yeah, that's an important point. I see a lot of grocery stores, they put their potatoes on, they're green, and yeah, any light exposure, right, will start to set that poisoning into a potato. Yeah, and so that's when I plant potatoes, ideally I mulch once, and then once they come up through, I mulch them again. That's kind of like hilling with natural mulches in a sense. Okay. Now squash, similar to potatoes, excellent pioneer crop. Okay. And we kind of already talked about this, but mounds spaced out every 5 feet. Okay. And then letting them spread. Okay. And I got to keep things moving along here. But yeah, squash is a great way, especially for sheet mulching. You start a garden with squash. And you can kind of see in that here, every 5 feet, it's just a mound of manure. And we planted seeds or starts into those mounds. Okay, so now it's important. There's 2 different types of squash. There's the pepo, right? Which is delicatas. Okay, spaghetti squash, acorns. And that's also zucchinis are a pepo. Okay, that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then there's the maxima squashes. Okay, this is a buttercup here. And there's also a lot of the maximas are bigger. Okay, Hubbard, sweetmeat, Sibley is a really good one. Okay, the maximas are your storage, your long storage one. Okay, so when you're shopping for seeds to store for the hunger gap, you want to look for the species maxima, Cucurbita maxima. Okay, and we love, you know, our peppos too. Like the delicatas are a great treat in the fall. We cooked one the other day, and it loses its flavor by this time of year, even if it stores. Where a lot of these ones can keep their flavor. And if you're new to growing winter squash, this is my top recommendation. Okay, buttercup, not butternut. Okay, butternut's different. This is buttercup. Yep.
I planted some of those in August one year and got 15 squashes in August.
There's some.
It's an excellent producer. It's, you know, it does well in this area. How were they? Were they good?
They're small, but they're a lot.
Small, but yeah, so. It's still produced planting in August. So. Yeah. The Maxima squash, they do well with a sun cure. Okay, so most people, they just put them in their greenhouse for about 10 days. And that sun, it hardens the skin and primes them for storage. Okay, and then another thing with Maximas is you actually want to wait to eat them. So you bring them inside room temperature, right? Or dry storage. You want to wait a month, and really probably a couple months, like sweetmeats and Sibley's. They really don't come into their full flavor until around Thanksgiving. And so, you know, a lot of times I think people buy Maxima squashes at like the farmer's market and they cook them right away and they don't have that full flavor. You know, they require a cure, an indoor cure. Okay. So the peppos, okay, so like our delicatas and our zucchinis, okay, we transplant those. We start the seeds ahead of time and we transplant those, okay? And the Maximas, they have a taproot, okay? So we direct seed our Maximas. You can see here, these are sweetmeats, okay? If you're looking for like a bigger, really bigger family, maybe like a real food supply, sweetmeats, we've had great luck with those. They're delicious. They produce well. Sibley is another great one we've had good luck with. Yeah.
One of the other ones that we've discovered is like this is called the Hopi Pale Gray.
Hopi Pale Gray, and you've had good success.
They're a long runner. They'll run long vines, but the fruit will grow in excess. Well, we've got one still. It's a year old. It's 15 pounds, and they will store for a year. Perfectly edible, very delicious. Good seeds. You can eat seeds as well.
And what was it?
Hopi Pale Gray. Hopi, like the Hopi, they're
Yep.
Hopi Indian squash.
Okay, so Hopi Pale Gray. I love to hear good reports of squash in different varieties that do well around here, because that's what we have to find the varieties that work around here. You can't just count on what's in the seed catalog that they're growing, you know, out in the Pacific Northwest, or, you know, like Fedco Seeds in Maine is a great place, but like you can't count on that. We have our own, you know, type of climate here, right? Dry and hot in the summer, but it's also cold come fall and spring. So yeah. So corn, okay. So we are at 11:45. If anyone had somewhere to be or something, but I'm going to keep going if that's okay. Okay. But yeah. Give people a minute here to.
I can find my mother.
All right, go find your mom. All right, so corn. Okay, how beautiful is this, huh? And when we're talking about field corn versus sweet corn, okay, field corn, right? This is a dry grinding corn. Okay, sweet corn is varieties that are bred for sweetness when they're harvested in an earlier stage, in the milk stage. Okay, and if you let sweet corn grow to maturity, when it dries down like this, you'll have seed. If it's open pollinated, you know, you'll have seed for the sweet corn, but not necessarily a good food. Where, you know, these field corns are bred to dry down in the field and then grind into food, more or less. Okay, and the corn, really why it's the most important one, really, you know, any extra ground I have in my garden, I plant the corn. Okay, because corn is a multi-year storage squash or crop. Okay, we get one year. And then does anyone know what happened the summer of 1816? like the original homesteaders in New England. Anyone heard about that? Okay, the summer that never came because of volcanic eruptions on the other side of the world, I believe. Okay, they had frost every month. Okay, there was a foot of snow in July in New England. Okay, massive crop failures and starvation. And that's where, you know, our grain storage becomes so important, right? Because it's a multi-year, you know, this will last 10 years, if not 100 in good conditions, even, right? They open up Egyptian tombs and find, you know, wheat berries and corn. Yeah, I don't know about corn, but wheat berries I've heard. And so corn is the easiest homegrown grain, okay? You need twice as much land for the same yield of wheat. Okay, so corn produces twice as much in a sense. It requires more fertility, okay, and probably more irrigation in general, but then it produces twice as much. Okay, and it's so much easier to thresh and winnow, which means just, you know, clean it to the point where you just have the grain. Okay, wheat, right? You have to harvest it and stand it up in a shook to continue curing, then bring it on a tarp and bash it and get the grain heads to fall out. Then you have to winnow it, you know, and get the chaff to blow off. You know, corn, you just go out and you just pick your ear and pull the husk back, and, you know, then it's just kind of, you know, rubbing the kernels off. If you get into big corn patches, there's machines where you can send the cobs through and it'll remove the kernels from the cob. But, you know, I'm not going to do it because I want to keep it on right now, but you can, you know, you just rub them off with your fingers or other little tools. But yeah, so when we're talking about field corn, about grain corn, there's flint, there's dent, and there's flour. Okay. Typically up north, flint corns were grown. Okay. Indigenous cultures, the north was more of the flint corns. In the south, you find more of the flour corns. Dent corn is just a hybrid of flint and flour. And they call it dent because when it dries, the kernels start to dent a little when they have the combination of traits. Okay, so, and then this is a flint corn here. Okay, Cascade Ruby Gold, Roy's Callus Flint. Okay, that's what these there were two varieties we started with. And so it's kind of a mix of both here. And flint corns kind of give you a grainier, if you make a cornbread, it's like a little grainier, you know, where flour corn grinds down to like really fine, and you can make, you know, finer baked products, you know, baked goods out of it. Flour corn, it molds easier. Okay, flint corn is really tough. It can, you know, when it's drying in the field in September, if it rains and snows, like your flint corn is probably going to be all right. Okay, and then in storage, it's good, it's tough. So when we're shopping for varieties of corn to grow, whether it's flint corn or flour corn or dent corn, we want short days to maturity, DTM. And that's really important with squash too. Okay, short DTM, days to maturity, and beans. Okay, really important, right? Because we have our short growing season.
Have you grown the Painted Mountain or
I have, yeah.
which variety is that?
So Painted Mountain is a flour corn. Okay, and it's an excellent genetic database for like these really tough early finishing flour corn. Yeah, Dave Christensen bred that in Montana. Okay, and that's a great, you know, flour corn. Because we need that early maturity, right? We need those tough early maturing corns. Yeah.
So 2 years ago, we used the neighbor's garden to try to grow corn, and it didn't turn out well.
Okay.
We had good stalks, good cobs. It was good with the terrible. But we talked to a couple different people that said that we may have been watering too much. Is that a real thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You can overwater. So when you start to overwater, right, the plant's roots aren't getting enough oxygen. Okay, especially if your soil doesn't drain. Now, if you were on a sandier soil and you were overwatering, you might have been all right because that water's draining out. But if there's enough clay content in that soil and you're overwatering, the roots are going to start to drown, and they're not going to like it. So that could have been the case with your corn. Absolutely. Okay, so you can see here a corn patch that was seeded out. And so we direct seed. I like to seed in mid-May. Okay, it's not like sweet corn. Sweet corn needs warm soil to germinate. Okay, the flint corns and the northern flour corns, they actually a lot of them will germinate pretty good in cooler conditions. Okay, and it's a good way to start breeding for ones that do. We always overseed, right? We overseed because we want to get as many seeds in there to see which ones come up and do well. Okay, and then we thin, right? So we overseed and we thin, a really nice strategy when you're planting out a patch of corn. And like we mentioned, corn likes lots of fertility. Okay, so we put our manure down in rows. We grow corn, and then maybe the next year we'll rotate potatoes into that patch because they don't need as much fertility. Okay, so we have our 3 patches of staple foods, and they go through a rotation, right? Where corn and squash are the heavy feeders that like more nitrogen, more fertility. Okay, so we'll manure the field, the rows or the mounds. We'll grow the corn or the squash, and the next year we'll come in and we'll rotate them to potatoes and beans that don't need the newly, manured fields. Yeah.
Transplant well, or because of it.
I was just talking with my friend Truck about that. I don't think corn transplants very well. Huh?
I don't think so.
I think the roots are pretty sensitive. It's direct seeded. Yeah, not transplanted.
By the way, when the sweet corn, what I would always do is I would I would lay out my seed on like paper towels or whatever, get it moist and lay out my sweet corn seed, and then I cover it and let it sprout, and it always grew faster and better. And I would put Epsom salts and sometimes like one of the feeds in the clean plant it, and then the corn shot it faster.
So pre-sprouting your corn seed.
Yeah, sweet. So for sweet corn.
For sweet corn, I'm sure it would work for probably the grain corn too. Pre-sprouting is definitely a great strategy with a lot of crops too. Soak the seed ahead of time, pre-sprout. Absolutely. So now with corn, okay, with our field corn, we want this to dry right on the stalk in the field. So we got to cut the irrigation. Okay. We cut the irrigation in August, and then just let it dry down in the field to the point you can kind of see here, the plants are brown and dry, right? And we're just letting it dry right in the field. Okay. Then we go, depending on the variety, sometime in September, and you can pull that dry brown husks back, and you have, a dry ear of corn that around here, it's usually ready for storage, pretty quickly.
I have someone asking if it's possible to grow the 3 sisters method in Montana.
Yeah, I would say the 3 sisters method is absolutely possible in Montana. The challenges that I find with kind of interplanting is, water is a very precious resource on our farm, even though, we're very blessed in this area. There's a lot of water, right? I mean, you look up at the snow-covered mountains, it's amazing. But it still requires pumps, electricity. Like I can't fix a pump, and so when I'm running a sprinkler, I want to be really efficient with what my water is doing. And so I tend with my corn patches to kind of focus on corn and let corn get all that water instead of trying to mix in, squash likes a lot of water. So you start mixing in squash. Okay. It's going to use some water, but also, okay, corn is tall. So to get enough sun into a squash or a bean, you have to really spread that crop out to get enough sun in. Okay. So it's definitely a great, interesting strategy. But I find myself going more to traditional rows. And I'm going to keep moving along here. So you can store it on the cob, or you can remove it off and store it in jars. Okay, if you're tight on space, it probably stores a little better on the cob. And also, these are my seed ears. They're my best looking ears that I'm going to be replanting this year. Okay, and when you keep them on the cob, they germinate a little better than if you decob them.
Where you're removing the kernels off the ground.
So I have a machine. I think I got it from Pleasant Hill Grain, where you can stick the cobs through and kind of crank it, and it removes the kernels. But you can also I also will just sit by the wood stove and rub off kernels into a bucket and then grind them for dinner. So
What are you grinding that?
all right, so when you get into growing your own grain, okay, now we're talking about home grinding mills, okay, and we're really fortunate to live in a time where this technology is available to us. You know, in the past, every town, village had like a collective mill, which was probably better because they had nice stone mills and whatnot. But either way, it's great to be able to grind this in our home kitchen. And so there's lots of options for home grinding mills. Layman's.com is a great place to kind of check them out if you never have. And this one is a Corona hand mill. I'm not sure if they still make them, but there's very similar ones out there if they don't. And if you rub these kernels off and you go to grind a flint corn especially, okay, flint's harder to grind than flour, right? Flour's softer, flour corn. You want to do it in multiple passes. So the first pass, you don't have those burrs set so tight, and you just crack the corn. Send it through again, tighten those burrs up, get it a little finer. Send it through again. Now we're getting into a nice polenta, you know, maybe a cornmeal that'll make a bread. Now, to make that grinding easier with a simple home mill, you can nixtamalize your corn, which really is a pretty simple process, okay, that involves basically putting the kernels in a pot of water with a spoonful of cal lime, right? Pickling lime, it's sometimes called, and bring it to not a boil, right, but just a simmer. And simmer, you know, most people say a half hour, right? Like, what do you usually do?
Usually just bring it to a simmer, put the lid on and let it sit for an extended period of time, and then still a lot of residual heat.
And just let it sit. You turn the burner off, let it sit.
And then just let it sit all the way, do it the day before.
And so you let it sit overnight, you let it continue soaking. Okay, so you do it the night before, you cook it, you know, you bring it to a simmer in that pickling lime, a spoonful of pickling lime. Okay, and then let it sit soaking overnight. Next day, you drain it off, you wash it, and there, you know, you can look this up. I don't want to go too much into it, but it's really a pretty simple process. I just want to encourage people to look into it because, you know, my wife have found like it brings out more flavor, but also the corn digests a lot better. Like it sits better in a sense. And, you know, nixtamalization was a technology that was used by indigenous cultures on this side of the world as far back as we know. And then it's interesting because, you know, after Columbus and corn started going back to, you know, Europe and other places, they didn't bring the nixtamalization with them. It's kind of interesting that technology was lost crossing the ocean. But we found it to be a, you know, really beneficial step.
Another, if you're looking for a good grain mill, there's a company in Hamilton that makes them right down south of us here. It's called Grain Maker.
Okay, Grain Maker in Hamilton, Montana.
In Hamilton, Montana.
Excellent.
They've done it really, all steel mills, they're good stuff.
Okay, excellent. We should keep going. Okay, we're gonna go for another 5 minutes, but if you gotta head out, I totally understand. You know, the last one I'll talk about today is dry bush beans, okay? And you can also do dry pole beans, but you have to be dedicated to going out there and picking, right? Because pole beans will keep growing up your pole and they'll dry, okay, over, you know, August into September. And so you got to go out every few days or whatever it is and pick the beans that are drying down. Okay, when we're talking about dry beans, dry bush beans, we're talking about a plant that gets up, you know, grows up, it's green and it puts out its beans. And then just like corn, it sits there and it dries, it dies, it turns brown. And then we go out and we harvest the brown pods of it. And then at that point, it's dry and ready for storage, usually in our climate. Okay. So then dry bush beans, that's another one you got to cut the irrigation on, right? Because we're trying to dry these down in the field. So we want to cut the irrigation in August and let them start to dry down. We don't want to keep watering them as they're trying to dry down. Who knows what shatter means when we're collecting? Anyone?
Pod show?
Yeah, the pod shatters. So that's something you got to watch for, especially with legumes. Okay, so beans, the pod as it's drying down, they shatter. They disperse their seed, right? It's a natural way of sending their seed out into the world. Okay, so a lot of these varieties are bred to not shatter very quickly because we want enough time to harvest them before they do shatter. Okay, but it's something you can't just leave it out there. You know, once it's dry and brown, you want to get it, because if it just sits there, eventually it's gonna shatter, right? If you're trying to save seed from your peas or something, and you don't ever go out and it's like, where'd they go? They shattered and they drop to the ground, and then they're really hard to find once they hit the ground. Okay, thresh and winnow, it's really pretty easy. So you harvest the dried pods. Now we got to get the bean out of the pod, right? And so you can dump them onto a tarp and dance around and crush them. Okay. Thresh and winnow, right? Thresh, it means crush, right? It means separate. Okay. That's kind of how maybe you can remember is thresh is like crush, and then winnow is like wind. Okay. And so now that we have our crushed, beans here, there's still lots of dry material in there. We need to use the wind to blow that dry, light material away. That's called winnowing. Okay. So winnowing, we use the wind or a fan. Okay. And blow that dry material off. Okay. So beans, very easy to thresh and winnow, which is great. This, like, you can just have them in a 5-gallon bucket and just kind of reach in with your hand if you don't have very many and just crush them. Okay. And then just, any dry pods you can separate by hand, and then just dump that bucket in front of a fan and watch the dry material blow away. And then you'll get a nice clean bean that you can put in a jar and store for winter. Okay. Then you always soak your beans before cooking them, but I'm not going to go into that. Great in crop rotation, right? Why would beans be good in a crop rotation? Nitrogen fixer. Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to kind of wrap it up there. We're not going to go into, I was going to go into apples, but yeah, we're kind of out of time. We're way over time, but thank you all very much.